"Daddy, why did that lady leave so fast?" Little girl asked. When the single dad ran after her, she confessed the truth. Tyler Bennett was sitting on a park bench in Reed Park on a Saturday afternoon in Tucson, watching his 6-year-old daughter Zoe hang upside down from the monkey bars like some kind of fearless tiny acrobat. And he was doing that thing all single parents do, where half your brain is making sure your kid doesn't crack their skull open, and the other half is running through the mental checklist of everything you need to get done before Monday. He was 29 years old and worked as a PE teacher at Diaz Middle School, and Saturdays were his sacred daddy-daughter time because his ex-wife Amanda had Zoe on Sundays. And he'd learned the hard way that if he didn't have a consistent routine with his kid, she'd feel the instability of the divorce even more than she already did. The Arizona sun was doing that late afternoon thing where it wasn't quite as brutal as midday, but still hot enough that Tyler was grateful for the mesquite trees providing some shade, and he was scrolling through his phone, checking the grocery list he'd started when Zoe had announced at breakfast that they were completely out of the good cereal and only had the healthy stuff left, which was apparently a crisis. About 20 feet away from Tyler's bench, there was a woman sitting alone reading a paperback book, and he'd noticed her in that vague way you notice other humans in public spaces without really paying attention, just registered that she was there and seemed absorbed in whatever she was reading. She looked to be around his age, dark hair cut in a bob that ended just above her shoulders, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt from some 5K charity run. And she had the kind of posture that suggested she'd had a long week and was enjoying the hell out of sitting still with a book and nobody asking her for anything. Tyler went back to his grocery list and lost track of time until he heard Zoe's voice getting closer in that rapid-fire way she talked when she was excited about something. And he looked up to see his daughter standing right next to the reading woman's bench, holding up her stuffed bunny that she'd insisted on bringing, even though Tyler had told her it was going to get dirty. The woman had set down her book and was smiling at Zoe in that polite way adults smile at chatty kids they don't know. And Tyler could hear his daughter explaining in excruciating detail that the bunny's name was Pancake because when she first got it, the ears were all flat like pancakes, but now they stood up more. That's a very good name. Pancake is lucky to have someone who takes such good care of him. The woman's voice carried over to where Tyler was sitting, and there was something familiar about it that pinged in the back of his brain. But he was already standing up to go collect his kid before she talked this stranger's ear off for the next 20 minutes. He walked over and was about to apologize for the interruption when he got close enough to actually see the woman's face, and his entire world screeched to a complete stop like someone had hit pause on reality. "Zoe, don't bother the nice lady. Come on, we need to let her get back to her book." Tyler said it on autopilot while his brain tried to process what his eyes were telling him. And the woman looked up at him. In the exact second she registered his face, all the color drained out of hers like someone had pulled a plug. Tyler stood there frozen because this wasn't just some random woman at the park. This was Rachel Morrison. This was the girl he'd dated all through high school. This was the person who disappeared from his life when he was 19 years old without a single word of explanation and who he'd spent months trying to track down before finally accepting she was gone. She looked different. Her hair used to be longer and she'd lost weight, and she was wearing glasses he didn't remember. But those eyes were the same. That face was burned into his memory from 3 years of being completely in love as a teenager. "Rachel, Rachel Morrison, is that you?" Tyler's voice came out strange even to his own ears, somewhere between shocked and confused, and about 17 other emotions he couldn't name. And Rachel stood up so abruptly she knocked her water bottle off the bench and it hit the ground and rolled under the seat. She was staring at him with an expression that looked like pure panic, and her mouth opened like she was going to say something, but no sound came out. And Tyler watched her face cycle through shock to recognition to something that looked a lot like terror in the span of about 3 seconds. "I'm sorry, I have to go." Rachel's voice came out shaky and quiet, and before Tyler could process what was happening, she turned and started walking fast toward the parking lot, leaving her book and her water bottle and everything else behind, like the bench was on fire. Zoe, who'd been watching this whole exchange with the confused curiosity of a 6-year-old, grabbed Tyler's hand and said loud enough for the whole playground to hear, "Daddy, why did that lady leave so fast?" Did I scare her with Pancake? She said she liked him, but then she ran away. She okay? Tyler was still standing there in complete shock, watching Rachel's retreating form practically jogging through the park, and his brain was trying to reconcile the fact that he'd just seen the girl who broke his heart a decade ago, and she'd literally fled the second she realized who he was. No, baby, you didn't scare her. Pancake's not scary at all. I think she just remembered something she had to do. He said it while his mind spun because that was Rachel. That was definitely her, and she'd run away from him again just like she did all those years ago. Tyler's hands were shaking slightly when he pulled out his phone and called his buddy Brian, who he'd seen earlier at the park with his two kids. And when Brian picked up, Tyler said without preamble, "Man, I need a huge favor. Can you watch Zoe for like 20 minutes? I'll explain later, but it's kind of an emergency." Brian must have heard something in Tyler's voice because he didn't ask questions. Just said, "Yeah, bring her over. We're at the splash pad." And Tyler scooped up Zoe and speed walked over to where Brian's kids were running through the water features. "I'll be right back, sweetie. You stay with Mr. Brian and play with his kids, okay? Daddy has to go talk to someone really quick." And Zoe looked concerned, but Brian distracted her by asking if she wanted to help his daughter collect rocks. And Tyler took off toward the parking lot at a dead run. He was sprinting past families packing up their picnic stuff and couples walking dogs, and his PE teacher conditioning meant he wasn't even winded when he hit the parking lot and started scanning for Rachel. And for a second he thought she'd already left until he spotted her sitting in the driver's seat of a dark blue Honda Civic with her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. Tyler ran up to the car and knocked on the window, and Rachel jumped like he'd fired a gun. And when she turned to look at him, her face was streaked with tears, and she was shaking her head no, like she was begging him not to make her do this. He made a rolling motion with his hand to indicate she should lower the window, and after what felt like an entire year, she cracked it about 2 inches. "Roll it down all the way, we need to talk. You don't get to run away again without at least telling me why." Tyler's voice came out harder than he meant it to, but he was running on pure adrenaline and confusion and anger that he'd buried for a decade. Rachel's voice was barely audible through the crack in the window. "Tyler, please, just let me go. I can't do this. Not here, not now." And her hands were trembling on the steering wheel. "No, absolutely not. You left me 10 years ago without a word. You changed your number. You blocked me on everything. I tried to find you for months, and you just vanished. And now I see you at a random park, and you're gonna run again? Hell no, Rachel. You owe me an explanation at minimum." She hit the button and the window went all the way down, and Tyler could see she'd been crying hard. Her eyes were red, and her breathing was uneven, and part of him wanted to comfort her, and part of him wanted to yell, and he had no idea which impulse to follow. "I can't talk about this in a parking lot. I can't do this right now. You have your daughter waiting. Just please let me leave." Rachel's voice cracked on the last word, and Tyler felt his anger shift slightly toward concern because whatever was happening here was clearly destroying her. "My daughter is with a friend. I'm not going anywhere until you give me something. Anything that explains why you're acting like seeing me is the worst thing that could have happened today." They sat there in a standoff for what felt like forever. Tyler standing outside her car and Rachel sitting inside, looking like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. And finally, she turned off the ignition with shaking hands and said so quietly, he almost didn't hear it, "Get in. I can't have this conversation through a window." Tyler walked around to the passenger side and climbed in. And the second the door closed, Rachel put her face in her hands and started crying for real. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and painful. And Tyler sat there in the passenger seat of his ex-girlfriend's car in a Tucson Park parking lot and thought that his life had just taken the weirdest possible turn. Tyler sat in the passenger seat of Rachel Morrison's car, watching her fall apart in a way that made his chest hurt, despite the fact that he was still furious with her. And the silence between them was thick with 10 years of unanswered questions and pain that neither of them had fully dealt with. Rachel was crying so hard she could barely breathe, and Tyler's PE teacher instinct kicked in enough to reach over and put a hand on her shoulder. Hey, you need to breathe. Slow down before you hyperventilate." And she nodded but couldn't seem to get control of the sobbing. They sat there in her car with the Arizona heat pouring in through the open window and the sounds of families leaving the park filtering through. And finally, Rachel's breathing evened out enough that she could talk, even though her voice came out wrecked and shaky. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for running just now, for running back then. For all of it, I know you deserve better than this. Rachel's words tumbled out between hitching breaths, and Tyler felt his anger spike again. Because apologies were great, but they didn't erase a decade of confusion and hurt. You're right, I do deserve better than this. I deserve better than waking up one day when I was 19 and finding out my girlfriend of 3 years had blocked my number and moved away without telling me where or why. I thought something happened to you, Rachel. I thought maybe your parents made you leave, or you got hurt, or I don't even know what. And then I found out from your cousin that you just decided to ghost me and start over somewhere else. His voice was getting louder, and he forced himself to take a breath, because yelling at her in a parking lot wasn't going to fix anything. Rachel was staring at her hands in her lap, and her voice came out so quiet Tyler had to lean in to hear it. I was 19 and terrified, and I made the worst decision of my life. I know that doesn't make it okay, but I need you to understand I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I thought I was doing you a favor. Tyler let out a laugh that had zero humor in it. A favor? How is breaking my heart and disappearing doing me a favor? That makes absolutely no sense, Rachel. Try again. She flinched like he'd slapped her, and Tyler felt a flash of guilt, but pushed it down because he'd earned the right to be angry about this. Rachel finally looked up at him, and her eyes were red and swollen and full of something that looked like shame. Right before I left, I went to the doctor for a routine exam. I'd been having really bad pain for months, and my periods were awful, and they did a bunch of tests, and they told me I had severe endometriosis, like really bad scarring and damage, and the doctor said I probably wouldn't be able to have kids. Maybe a 5% chance, even with treatment. Tyler's brain took a second to process what she was saying, and his first response was confusion about what that had to do with her leaving, and Rachel kept talking before he could ask. You remember how we used to talk about the future, about getting married someday and having a bunch of kids? You wanted 3 or 4? You had names picked out? You were so excited about being a dad someday? Tyler did remember those conversations. Remembered lying in the bed of his truck, looking at stars and talking about hypothetical kids they'd have together. Remembered how Rachel would laugh when he suggested ridiculous baby names, and how she'd say she wanted at least 2 so they'd have each other. Yeah, I remember. But Rachel, that was just talk. We were teenagers planning a future we didn't even know if we'd have. What does that have to do with you leaving? His voice came out gentler than he meant it to, because he was starting to piece together where this was going, and he really didn't like the picture forming in his head. Rachel's voice cracked when she answered. My parents, they weren't supportive when I told them about the diagnosis. My mom said I couldn't trap you with this, that it wasn't fair to let you stay with me when I couldn't give you what you wanted. My dad said you'd leave me eventually anyway, when you realized you wanted kids and I couldn't provide them. And they just kept saying it over and over until I believed them. Tyler felt ice water dump into his stomach, because he was starting to understand that Rachel had made a decision about their entire future based on fear and her parents' toxic advice. And he wanted to be sympathetic, but the anger was winning. So you decided for both of us? You didn't think maybe I deserved to know, to have a say in whether I wanted to stay? I was 19, Tyler. I was scared and hurting, and I believed them when they said I was broken, that I'd be holding you back from the life you deserved. Rachel was crying again, but quieter this time. I thought if I just disappeared, you'd move on and find someone who could give you everything I couldn't. I thought I was setting you free. Tyler ran his hands through his hair and felt like screaming, because this was the stupidest, most heartbreaking thing he'd ever heard. You weren't broken, Rachel. You had a medical condition. That's not the same thing. And you didn't set me free. You destroyed me. I spent months trying to find you. I was a mess my entire sophomore year of college because I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. They sat in painful silence while Tyler processed everything she'd just told him, and he could feel his anger shifting into something more complicated. Still mad, but also heartbroken for 19-year-old Rachel, who'd gotten devastating news, and instead of having support, had been told she wasn't good enough. You went through all of that alone. The diagnosis, the fear, the decision to leave, and you didn't trust me enough to let me be there for you. And Rachel's voice was barely a whisper when she said, I didn't think I was worth staying for. Tyler felt tears burning behind his own eyes because that sentence right there summed up the whole tragedy. She'd been so convinced she was damaged goods that she'd thrown away their entire relationship to save him from choosing her. You robbed us both, Rachel. You took away my choice. You decided you knew what was best for me without asking. And that's not love, that's just fear making decisions. Tyler's voice came out rough, and he wasn't even trying to hide that he was crying now, too. They were both crying in her car and probably looking completely unhinged to anyone walking past. And Rachel nodded because she couldn't deny what he was saying. I know. I know I messed up. I've known it for 10 years. I've carried the guilt every single day, wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life. And seeing you today just confirmed it, because you have this beautiful life and a daughter, and I threw all of that away. Tyler let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, because she just highlighted the irony without even realizing it. You think I have this perfect life? Rachel, I got married on the rebound, had Zoe because my ex-wife and I thought a baby would fix our failing marriage, got divorced when Zoe was 3 because surprise having a kid doesn't magically make you compatible, and I've been a single dad trying to split custody and not screw up my daughter for the past 3 years. He watched Rachel's face process that information, and her voice came out shocked. You're divorced, but you have Zoe. You got the family you wanted. I got a daughter I love more than anything in the world. But the family I wanted was supposed to be with you. And when that disappeared, I tried to build it with someone else. And it didn't work because I was trying to replace something I'd lost. Tyler said it and realized he'd never admitted that out loud before, that he'd married Amanda trying to fill the Rachel-shaped hole in his life, and it had been doomed from the start. Rachel put her hand over her mouth, and fresh tears started falling. I'm so sorry your marriage didn't work out. I never wanted you to be unhappy. That's the opposite of what I wanted. Tyler felt frustrated all over again. But you are sorry I got married, Rachel. That's what you wanted. You left so I could move on and have kids with someone else. You don't get to be sad that it happened. They were talking in circles, and Tyler knew they needed to either end this conversation or take it somewhere more productive. And he had about a million more questions fighting to get out. Are you still, is the diagnosis still, can you not have kids? He didn't know why he was asking, except that he needed to know if the thing she'd sacrificed everything for was still true. And Rachel's expression did something complicated. That's the worst part. After I left, I got treatment, saw different doctors over the years, and my condition stabilized. It's still there, but it's managed. And they told me a few years ago that with medical advances, I could potentially have kids now. Like the thing I based my entire decision on turned out to be based on incomplete information from one doctor when I was 19. Tyler felt like he'd been punched in the stomach because she was telling him that she'd thrown away their relationship for a diagnosis that wasn't even permanent, that with time and better medicine, the whole reason she left had essentially been erased. And the waste of it all made him want to put his fist through something. So we gave up years together. I married the wrong person. You've been alone all because you were too scared to tell me the truth and too young to get a second medical opinion. Is that what you're saying? Rachel was full on sobbing again. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I ruined both our lives because I was a scared kid who listened to the wrong people. Tyler sat there feeling every emotion at once. Anger and grief and frustration, and underneath it all, a tiny thread of something that felt dangerously close to the feelings he used to have for her. And he shoved that down hard because he couldn't deal with that on top of everything else. I don't know what to do with this information, Rachel. I don't know how to process that you're back in Tucson, that you've been here. Have you been here this whole time? She shook her head. I moved back 2 years ago for a job at the East Side Animal Clinic. I'm a vet tech now, and I've seen you around a couple of times since I got back. At the grocery store once, at a coffee shop, and I always left before you could see me because I was too much of a coward to face you. 2 years you've been back, and you never reached out, never tried to explain or apologize or anything. You just kept avoiding me. Tyler felt the anger surge again because she'd had multiple chances to make this right and had chosen to hide instead. I didn't think I had the right to disrupt your life. I figured you'd moved on and forgotten about me, and showing up out of nowhere would just hurt you more. Rachel's voice was defensive now, and Tyler laughed bitterly. Forgotten about you? Rachel, you were my first love. You don't just forget that. But you're right about one thing. Showing up would have hurt. Just like today hurt. Just like this entire conversation is hurting. But at least now I have answers, instead of spending the rest of my life wondering what I did wrong. They sat in heavy silence for a few minutes while both of them tried to pull themselves together. And finally Tyler said what he'd been thinking since this conversation started. I need time to process all of this. I can't just forgive you right now, even though I understand why you did what you did, but I also can't just walk away without, I don't know, having some kind of closure or resolution. Rachel nodded and pulled her phone out with shaking hands. Can I give you my number? You don't have to use it, but if you want to talk more or yell at me more or whatever you need, I'll be here. I owe you that much at least. They exchanged numbers in her car in the parking lot with both their faces swollen from crying. And when Tyler opened the door to get out, Rachel's voice stopped him. For what it's worth, I never dated anyone seriously after you. I threw myself into work and school and built a life. But it's been lonely, and I know I don't have the right to say this, but seeing you today, even though it was terrifying, was also the first time in 10 years I felt like I could actually breathe. Tyler looked back at her, and his voice came out softer than he intended. I believe you, and for what it's worth, you're not the only one who's been lonely. Turns out breaking up with your first love leaves a mark that doesn't really fade. He got out of the car and walked back toward the park to collect his daughter, and his hands were still shaking, and his heart was racing, and he had absolutely no idea what happened next. But at least now he knew the truth. Tyler drove home from the park that Saturday with Zoe chattering in the back seat about the rocks she'd collected with Brian's kids. And his brain was spinning so hard he almost missed his exit off I-10 because he couldn't stop replaying the parking lot conversation with Rachel in his head like a movie stuck on repeat. He spent the next 4 days going through the motions of his life, teaching PE classes and grading fitness tests and making dinner for Zoe. And every single night after his daughter went to bed, he'd pull up Rachel's contact in his phone and stare at it without knowing what to say. Thursday evening, he finally gave up overthinking and sent a text that just said, "Coffee sometime? We probably have more to talk about." And his hands were shaking when he hit send. And Rachel's response came back within 2 minutes. "Yes, whenever you're ready, I'm here." They met that Sunday at a coffee shop in downtown Tucson while Zoe was at her mom's house. And Tyler walked in to find Rachel already sitting at a corner table, looking just as nervous as he felt. And when their eyes met, they both did this awkward half-wave thing that would have been funny if the situation wasn't so loaded with history and pain. They ordered coffee they barely touched and sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence for about 30 seconds before both trying to talk at the same time, and then laughing nervously and doing that "you go first, no you go first" thing, until Tyler finally just started talking. "I've been angry at you for 10 years, and now that I know why you left, I'm still angry. But I also get it. Like, I understand how a scared 19-year-old could make that choice, even if I think it was the wrong one. And I don't know what to do with that." Rachel's hands were wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I've forgiven myself. But Tyler, I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. And not a day has gone by that I haven't wondered what our lives would have looked like if I'd been braver." They talked for 4 hours straight, way past when the coffee shop employees started giving them looks for camping out at a table. And Rachel told him about moving to Phoenix after she left, going to school for veterinary technology, working her way up in clinics, moving back to Tucson for a better job, building a life that looked fine from the outside but felt empty. Tyler told her about marrying Amanda on what he now recognized was a rebound, having Zoe and being terrified he'd screw up fatherhood. The divorce that was sad but amicable because they both knew they'd gotten married for the wrong reasons. The past 3 years of learning to co-parent and put his daughter first. "I haven't seriously dated anyone since the divorce. A few first dates here and there, but nothing stuck because I think I've been holding everyone up to a memory of you that probably isn't even accurate anymore. Just this idealized version of what we had in high school." Tyler said it and watched Rachel's expression shift to something soft and sad. "I did the same thing, compared everyone to you, and they all came up short, which is insane because we were kids. We didn't even know who we were yet. But you were the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough, exactly as I was. They sat with that for a minute, both acknowledging that whatever they'd had at 16 through 19 had left a mark that neither of them had successfully moved past. And Tyler found himself saying something he hadn't planned to say. Do you want to try this? Like, actually try to see if there's still something here? Or if we're just holding on to nostalgia? Rachel looked at him with eyes that were hopeful and terrified in equal measure. I want to. God, I want to. But Tyler, what if I mess it up again? What if I hurt you or run away or prove your anger was justified? Tyler leaned forward across the table. Then we deal with it. But I need you to promise me right now that if you get scared, you'll talk to me instead of disappearing. Because I can handle a lot of things, but I can't handle being ghosted again. Not by you. They agreed to take it incredibly slow, start as friends and see where it went. No pressure and no expectations beyond honesty. And when they left the coffee shop, Tyler felt something he hadn't felt in years. Actual hope that maybe the universe was giving them a second chance they both desperately needed. 2 months of careful friendship followed, coffee dates and walks around the university campus, and long phone calls after Zoe was asleep. And they were both learning each other as adults instead of the teenagers they'd been, discovering new quirks and interests while recognizing the core of who they'd always been. Tyler's ex-wife Amanda was supportive when he told her he was seeing someone. If she makes you happy, I'm genuinely glad. You've been alone too long. Just make sure she's good to Zoe if it gets serious. The first time Tyler introduced Rachel to Zoe properly, instead of as a random park stranger, they met at the zoo, and Zoe's face lit up when she recognized her. You're the bunny lady from the park. Did you come to see the animals with us? Rachel knelt down to Zoe's level. I work with animals every day at my job, but I'd love to see them with you if that's okay. And Tyler watched his daughter grab Rachel's hand and drag her toward the elephant exhibit while explaining in exhausting detail everything she knew about elephants, which was apparently a lot. 6 months into whatever they were building, Tyler and Rachel were both in individual therapy, working through their respective issues, his abandonment trauma and her tendency to self-sabotage, and they'd started seeing a couples therapist too, even though they weren't officially calling themselves a couple yet because they both knew they needed professional help to not repeat old patterns. Rachel had also finally confronted her parents about the advice that cost her a decade, and while it hadn't gone well, she'd set boundaries she should have set at 19. Rachel had become a regular presence in Tyler and Zoe's life, coming to soccer games and school art shows, helping with homework on nights when Tyler had to grade papers, teaching Zoe about different animals, and taking her to visit the clinic where she worked. Tyler's parents adored her once they got past the initial shock of, wait, isn't that the girl who broke your heart in high school? And his mom pulled him aside one Sunday dinner to say, she's different now, more grounded, and the way she is with Zoe is beautiful. Don't let the past ruin what you could have in the future. Everything was going well, genuinely well in a way that felt almost too good to be real. And that's when Rachel's old patterns started creeping back in. Tyler noticed her pulling away slightly, taking longer to respond to texts, making excuses to not come over, and he recognized it immediately as the same fear-driven distancing she'd done before. One night after Zoe was asleep, he called her and said without preamble, talk to me. I can feel you pulling away, and we promised we'd communicate, so tell me what's going on in your head right now. Rachel's voice came through the phone shaky and small. I'm terrified, Tyler. We're getting serious and Zoe's attached. And what if I screw this up? What if I hurt her or hurt you again? What if I'm not built for this and I just keep running when things get hard? Tyler took a deep breath and said what he needed her to hear. You're enough. Scared and messy and imperfect. You're enough. But I need you to stay this time, Rachel. I need you to fight the urge to run and trust that we can work through the hard stuff together. There was silence on the other end, and then crying, and Rachel's voice cracked when she said, I'm staying, I promise I'm staying. I won't run again. They worked through it with their therapist, identified her triggers and his, created communication strategies for when either of them felt the old fears creeping in, and slowly, carefully, they built something that felt solid instead of fragile. A year after that chance meeting at the park, Rachel moved in with Tyler and Zoe, And it wasn't some grand romantic gesture. It was practical and thoughtful and right, combining their lives in a way that made sense for all three of them. Zoe was thrilled to have Rachel around all the time. And one afternoon, Tyler found a drawing his daughter had made at school that showed three stick figures holding hands labeled Me, Daddy, and Rachel, with my family written across the top in careful second-grade handwriting. He showed it to Rachel that night and watched her eyes fill with tears. Is this okay? Me being this much a part of her life? I don't want to overstep or make her think I'm trying to replace her mom. Tyler pulled her close, and his voice was steady when he answered, You're not replacing anyone. You're adding to our family, and Zoe knows the difference. She chose you, and so did I. One Saturday afternoon, they ended up back at Reed Park where the whole thing had started, sitting on the same bench where Rachel had been reading a year ago, watching Zoe play on the same monkey bars where she'd been hanging upside down. Rachel leaned against Tyler's shoulder, and her voice was quiet when she said, I ran from this exact spot, left everything behind because I was too scared to face you, and it was the biggest mistake I ever made. Tyler wrapped his arm around her. Good thing I'm faster than you. Good thing I didn't let you get away twice. Zoe came running over, sweaty and happy, demanding they come see the lizard she'd found. And as they both stood up to follow their daughter, Tyler caught Rachel's hand. Thank you for staying, for choosing us even when it was scary. Sometimes fear makes us run from the very thing we need most. Sometimes we make terrible decisions at 19 that echo through our entire lives. And sometimes, if we're really lucky, we get a second chance to choose differently. Tyler and Rachel had lost years to fear and miscommunication and bad advice, but they'd found each other again in a park on a random Saturday, and this time, when things got hard, they chose to stay instead of run. Love isn't just the feeling, it's the daily choice to keep showing up even when staying feels harder than leaving. It's the work of building trust after it's been broken. It's looking at someone who hurt you and saying, I'm willing to try again if you are. If this story reminded you that second chances are real, but they require both people to be braver than they were the first time, that running from fear doesn't protect you, it just makes you lonely, that the right person is worth staying for, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for being here with us. And remember, the people who are meant to be in your lives will come back. And when they do, you get to choose whether to run or stay. Choose to stay every single time.